Wow, it's the end of the year already. You know what time it is?
Where's the Kirby 64 video?
2 more weeks! 2 more weeks! Wow, it's the end of the year already. Well, you know what time it is. It's time for the 2024 installment of Pekachow's Game Awards, the only Game Awards show better than the actual Game Awards. Although this year I can't 100% say how much better this Game Awards is going to be than the actual Game Awards because I didn't actually see this year's Game Awards. There wasn't really a Forgotten Land or Pikmin 4 to really draw me to watch that Nothing Burger this year, and well, I was busy working. 64 video ain't gonna cook itself. So because I didn't see this year's Game Awards, I don't really have as much intro fluff to really pad the intro out with, but you could also just choose to stop and look at my background. Look how cool and spiffy it is, isn't it neat? And also, I'm a little bit sick, so sorry if I sound a little weird or annoying right now. Normally, I just wait to like heal up and get better, but I'm seriously running out of time to get this video done by the end of the new year, so, you know, my voice sounds decent enough. It could have been much worse, so yeah. But anyways, you know what happens at Pekachow's Game Awards. And if you don't, well, here's a brief rundown of what goes on here. I choose 10 games I've played this year, which could include games from before 2024, so if you're looking for a 2024 game overview, this isn't really the place to find that, although there are a good few 2024 games I'll be discussing here. And what I do is I just give each of these games an award that may or may not be extremely oddly specific because I want to talk about one of these games really bad, and I just yap about the game for a little bit. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It's just a cool little way for me to recap and share my year with all of you wonderful viewers out there, and it also gives me an opportunity to talk about some games I might have not been able to find an excuse to talk about otherwise. And so with all of that stuff out of the way, let's waste no more time and get right into the awards.
Our pretty awesome, but kind of falls off a little bit at the end, not gonna lie, award goes to Mega Man Battle Network 6, specifically Psybeast Falzar version, because that's the one I played. And you remember the end of last year's Game Awards when I said BN6 would be showing up somewhere? Look at that. Ooh, continuity.
Yep, continuity indeed. Now, if you remember last year's Pekachow's Game Awards and watched the whole thing all the way through to the end, you'll probably remember my freakishly large and concerning amount of time I spent on the Mega Man Battle Network Legacy Collection, which has only gotten bigger since I showed it off in that video. But you'll also remember that I gave Mega Man Battle Network 5, Team Proto Man specifically, because it's the one I played and also it's just better. Fight me, Colonel Heads. The prestigious honor of being the best game I played all year last year, and yeah, I still do agree with that. Battle Network 5 is just such a top-tier game. It's amazing. But now's not the time to talk about BN5. If you want to know why I love BN5 so much, go check out that other video, because this time we're talking about Battle Network 6. And yeah, if the weirdly specific award I gave this game is any indication, I don't necessarily think that Battle Network 6 lives up to Battle Network 5, at least to me, as someone who loves BN5 to bits. But still, I found Battle Network 6 to be a great game, even if it does kinda lose some steam the more it goes along. But if there's one thing that never runs out of steam though, it's the combat, unsurprisingly. Battle Network 6's combat is pretty unanimously considered to be the absolute best in the series. I mean, it's the only one that really has an active PvP community, partially because it's also just the best balanced for PvP. Although I wouldn't really know because nobody seems to want to play online with randos anymore. I'm not going to go completely in-depth on Battle Network 6's combat and every single little thing that just makes it so good, but I do want to say the two things that really make combat in BN6 so good are the amazing chip selection full of just so many incredibly fun chips to play around with, and the forms, because there's just so many cool forms in Battle Network 6. I'd personally say that they're about on the same level as Battle Network 5's Double Souls, at least just comparing the two versions I actually played, because I'm not really familiar with the Colonel or Gregar forms whatsoever. But still, all these forms are just a blast to play around with. You could do so many really cool things with these forms. You could build all sorts of really cool folders, and just the cross system in general has so many really cool refinements over the Double Soul system, which just makes it kind of a better system, even if I do prefer Battle Network 5's Double Souls overall. And then there's also the Beast Out form, which just gives you all sorts of insane, crazy abilities that just allow you to go completely nuts on anything that comes in your path. But at the same time, it's also got some balance because unlike the cross system, you're actually timed with how long you can be in your beast form. But it's not without its risk and reward too, because there's also the beast over function, which just lets you get even more turns out of your beast form. But if you're unable to finish the battle in time after pushing for those extra turns, then you actually have to face some pretty serious repercussions. And you can even mix your cross and beast forms together, which just adds even more forms into this game. So there's just so much more to play around with. It's so good. It's so cool. I just love it. Now that I really think about it, it's not just the combat that's really good in BN6, but pretty much everything about the gameplay in here is just really, really good. Like, there's the dungeons, all of which were just extremely fun to go through. And then there's the Link Navi system, which I feel is a little underbaked, but still, it's super cool just being able to take one of these Navis and just roam through the game's entire internet world with them. which includes Aquaman, which is why Valzar is not only better, but peak best game ever, 10 out of 10. I mean, name another game where you can play as the Aquaman.exe. Besides the Japanese Battle Network I haven't played. That right there is enough to cement Battle Network 6 as something that's truly peak. Is what I'd say if the game doesn't kind of fall off at the end. Okay, well, not at the end. The end is really good. But after the 4th dungeon, I don't even know what happens. Initially, I was wondering if maybe the fatigue was just because I blew through this game in like 3 days, which is a lot quicker than I did for the other games in the series. But thinking back on it, no, it's just because the game just kind of falls off. It was progressing so smoothly up until the 4th dungeon, and then all of a sudden it just feels like you're being bombarded with cutscene after cutscene after cutscene, and very few of them are anything interesting, and some of the other ones that are interesting are just gone through so quickly because there's no time to just let things sit. You're moving around from area to area, just watching things happen, and it's just... Man, this is a Battle Network story. It's like a Saturday morning cartoon. Now, trust me, I'm completely fine with sitting through cutscene after cutscene after cutscene if what I'm watching is, like, interesting or entertaining or anything, but that's kinda not really here, and that's the main reason why Battle Network 6 just kind of falls off for me. Like, I'm not really surprised I didn't care for this bit when it happened for the 10th time, or the mayor. Like, yeah, he's bad, and he's bad. But I'm just saying, this whole plot point would have been so much more impactful if we didn't just find out he was bad, and then we had him getting arrested and sent to prison in the span of like 10 minutes. Now, I wouldn't say BN6 has a bad story. In fact, I found some of the characters to have really interesting stories and arcs. But a lot of this stuff in the second half, yeah, the game was just moving way too quickly for me to care about any of this. Well, at least the finale was still good. But yeah, that's Battle Network 6. It had some pretty big shoes to fill, and it didn't necessarily fill them perfectly. But Battle Network 6 just does so many things great, and overall, I feel like it was a pretty good finale to the series, as well as just being a really nice way to conclude my journey with the Legacy Collection, playing through all these games for the first time. I wouldn't say it's the best around, but there's a lot to love about Battle Network 6.
Oh man, I'm so glad I...
Wait, hold on, stop the transition. I'm just going through the list of nominees this year, and I'm just seeing no Kirby whatsoever, because there was no new Kirby games this year, and I already played them all, so I don't know what I'm supposed to talk about, and Kirby's kind of the main draw. Nobody really watches these even with Kirby, so without Kirby... Oh, looks like the execs are right. I might have to pull the plug. Something tells me this Pekachow's Game Awards. It needs a hero. It needs a hero or no one will be watching tonight. He's gotta be pink, and he's gotta be round, and there's gotta be someone inside. Are you sure this is the real Kirby, or is this just some nut job you ordered off Facebook Marketplace? Well, welcome to the show, Kirby. First question, are you real? Oh, that's fantastic. Next award.
Oh man, I'm so glad I got into Klonoa Award. Goes to what else but Klonoa 2, Lutetea's Veil. And check this guy out. Physical copy. It's European, so it clashes with like every other Switch game I own, but still super nifty.
Would you look at that? A little more continuity. Not to sound like I'm repeating myself, but again, if you saw last year's Game Awards video, you'd know that I played Klonoa Door to Phantom Isle for the first time, and I loved it. It was a game that really caught my attention because it just looked very Kirby-esque, and also Klonoa looks like Wapani's long-lost cousin or something. And hey, did you hear that? I mentioned Kirby. Just like you, buddy. But in the end, as I made my way through the game, I found out it was really just a brilliant platformer that also had a really excellent story, and by the end, I was just completely in love with it. I couldn't wait to check out the second one. Although, with it being a PS2 game, there was definitely a few hurdles I would need to get across if I did actually want to play it. Well, is what I would say if the Fantasy Reverie series didn't exist. Yeah, this collection, I'm not going to dwell on it too much because I'm just talking about Klonoa 2 as a game here and not the Fantasy Reverie series as a remaster. But I do just want to say I'm not too big of a fan of the visuals in this collection. They just look really cheap, and even the Klonoa 2 visuals don't look as good as the original PS2 version. If you ask me, in Door to Phantom Isle, oh, it's not even a competition. It really does look like this game's budget didn't even pass the double digits, but let's not dwell on that too much. Let's stay positive here. And yeah, well, I think I would have rather preferred to play the PS2 original, but at the end of the day, Klonoa 2 is still Klonoa 2, and Klonoa 2 is a game I love a lot, even more than the first one. Once again, I feel like the best place to start with this one is by looking at the gameplay and the levels, because that's the thing that just really drew me into Klonoa 2 right out of the gate. And a big part of why I say that is because I just love the themes in this game so much. The level themes are just so good, and it feels like there's just more interesting locations than in the first game, which already had a whole slew of interesting locations. Like, you've got a whole theme park area. There's a city that's just perpetually trapped in this state of war. There's the Ark levels, which have all these really cool ideas in them, even if it does suck the most to miss a collectible in one of those and need to go back through, because yes, they are the worst offender of Klonoa 2's increased level length, because they do go on for quite a while. And then there's my personal favorite, this stage here, the Maze of Memories. Oh, it's so peak. But it's not just the level themes and stuff that's interesting and amazing, because the gameplay itself is just amazing as well, and it takes everything the first game did and just does what a good sequel should and just expands it and takes it in all sorts of cool new directions. Most notably, it does this with Klonoa's main gimmick, which is being able to take enemies and inflate them and then kinda sorta use some of their powers to his own advantage. You know? Like Kirby. Klonoa 2 not only takes some of the things from the first game and expands upon them even more, like with these bomb enemies you can use to just blow things up, but it also introduces just a whole bunch of new enemies with all these cool new unique functions that just keep the game so interesting throughout the whole duration. You got ones you can use like helicopters that have these really weird but really fun controls to play around with. You got these guys that just kind of send you up in these really cool moments. It's nothing like too gameplay changing. There isn't too much gameplay at all, but it's just a really cool cinematic moment you get in some stages. And then there's my personal favorite, which are these enemies that you can just kind of slam into other enemies to change their color. And there's also these crystals you need to chuck them at when they are a certain color in order to get through and solve puzzles. And it's not just the traditional levels that are fun too, because Klonoa 2 also has an additional gameplay style with these boarding levels. And look, these things are a little bit of a pain to get all the Dreamstones on, but they're so much fun. They're just such a fun change of pace. And it's just awesome. It's like the closest thing we're ever going to get to a 3D Klonoa, which actually really breaks my heart. When are we gonna get another game? Oh, and just like the first game, the story here is just incredible as well. I found myself just getting more invested in this game's story even earlier than I was with the first one, because there's just more characters and dialogue, so there's just more the story has to offer earlier on. The game just has such an amazing cast, and they just have such lovable personalities, and they go through such amazing arcs. It's just such a brilliant story, and I just don't want to spoil any of it here, because you gotta check it out. Klonoa 2 is truly just a peak platformer, and you absolutely need to check it out if you haven't, which is hopefully a pretty easy sell to anyone who hasn't played it, because we're all Kirby fans here, right? I don't know why you'd be on this channel of all channels if you didn't love Kirby. And speaking of Kirby, how we feeling about Klonoa 2? Just a yes or a no? Oh, that's what I like to see. You heard it here first, folks. Klonoa 2 is Kirby approved. Now you gotta check it out. Please.
I can't believe it was only $10 where it goes to Sonic Superstars. And I'm so glad I didn't have to pay a penny more.
Ah yes, Sonic Superstars. Truly one of the Sonic games of all time. Now, Superstars was actually a game I was debating getting last year, but ultimately, in the end, mostly because of a certain other game that came out roughly around the same time last year, I decided not to get Superstars because I'm not made of money. I didn't have $120 to blow on games right then and there, so I just kind of left Superstars on the wayside to pick up later. And this year, I did pick up Superstars, and I'm very glad I waited, because this game sold for a whopping $60 retail. That's the price Sega thought this game was worth, but not Best Buy when they were doing this game sale thingy a few months back, because they actually sold it for $10, so yes, this guy got Sonic Superstars for $10. That's even lower than the usual $20 you see it for on like eBay and stuff, or even in stores sometimes, because, well, it's a Sonic game. I don't know why, but Sonic games just have a thing for going on sale after the game comes out and, like, you know, a few months pass. They're always on sale. So, Sonic Superstars for $10. Was it worth it? Well, I'd say so. It was a pretty alright game. Now, I think the best way to look at Superstars is to kind of divide it up into the good and bad, because I do feel this game has a lot in both things that kind of even it out to just be a bit of an okay experience overall. Probably the best thing about Superstars, though, is the physics. They do feel really good, very close to the actual classic physics they're trying to emulate. And yeah, I know some crazy Sonic fan in the comments is going to go say something like,
Oh, but there's 2 extra frames when you jump with Sonic. He jumps slightly slower than he does in Sonic 3.
but you know, they work. They get the job done. They feel close enough. I like them. Although having good gameplay is only half the battle for a platformer, because obviously you got to have some good level design in there too. And Superstars, well, we'll talk about some of the level design in a little bit, but there's definitely some highlights here. The game definitely does have its fair share of fun stages, or at least stages with interesting mechanics, even if they do wind up being a little frustrating in execution. But when these stages hit, I'd say they hit the mark well enough. I wouldn't necessarily say there's any, like, amazing standout stages in Superstars, but there's a good chunk of them I do find some fun in. Obviously, there's pretty good variety with all the different playable characters you can play as too, which I appreciate. The game's main gimmick, the Emerald powers, aren't exactly all created equal, but there are a fair few of them I found myself using quite a bit just trying to explore these levels and see everything they had to offer, so I found that to be pretty fun. And going hand in hand with that, I also feel like the game does a pretty decent job with its exploration as well. I love me a good bit of exploration in these classic-style 2D Sonic games, and besides maybe the physics, yeah, I'd say this is by far the game's strongest attribute. As for the not-so-positive things, though, well, I already said not every single level was a hit, and yeah, I mean not every single level is a hit. Like, some of these stages are just, like, not fun at all. Like, who approved of some of this stuff? Like, it's just kinda No, I don't want to do that. And as I said, while the game doesn't really have any sort of standout amazing stage, it definitely has a standout awful one. I hate Golden Capital. I hate it with a burning passion. I never, ever, 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 ever want to play that garbage again. It is dreadful. Every second of it was just torturous, and the music doesn't help. And speaking of the music in Superstars, for every song on this OST I can call good, there's a few I can say just aren't, whether I just think they're just kind of average and I don't really care for them, or whether they're just actively making blood just drip down from my ears because they're just so horrible with that Sonic 4 synth I hate. And if I didn't already beat the dead horse enough by crapping on the music, I'm about to beat that horse even harder when I complain about the bosses. I don't want to harp on this forever because everyone's complained about it, but yes, these bosses are as bad as they say. These bosses are just dreadful. They break the pace, they just kill all the excitement sometimes. In the main story, the bosses are mostly okay, with there actually being a few little gems in there. Once that turning point at Golden Capital hits and you go into the post-game story, oh man, every single boss just feels like a nightmare. Like seriously, what were they even doing? They took some bosses that were okay the first time around and just made them into awful, 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 horrible steaming garbage. And they made the worst ones even worse, like the one in Golden Capital. I just really hate Golden Capital, okay? But despite all of those flaws, I would still consider Sonic Superstars to be an okay game. Very, very far from the best Sonic game out there, but it's also quite far from being one of the absolute worst. For all the horrible things I've heard about Superstars, I actually found myself enjoying it a fair bit more than I was expecting to. But the thing is, I think I know exactly the reason why, and it's because it was only $10. For me anyways. So look, I'm not saying there's not a place for $60 2D platformers. I mean, the game I literally chose over Sonic Superstars was Mario Wonder for $60, a 2D platformer. And I'd say that that was a pretty fair price. I didn't feel like it duped or anything paying $60 for it. And that's not even getting into some of the other brilliant platformers you could buy with that kind of money. Like, look at my man Kirby right now. Speaking the truth, Return to Dream 1 Deluxe was worth every dollar, every penny even. It's perfectly fine for a good 2D platformer to cost $60, but an alright one, that's a little steep. So if I paid $60 for it like some of these other people, yeah, I'd probably hate it too. I kid. But I still probably would like it a little less though. For 10 smackers, it ain't bad though.
Our what? Gimmick 2 award goes to Gimmick 2. What? And look at that. Ooh, first ever physical official copy of Gimmick 2 right here in my hands. Real physical official Gimmick 2.
Out of all of the really cool and crazy announcements this year, none of them have really been able to just have my jaw on the floor like Gimmick 2. Like, I'm still trying to process the fact that this is a real game. Yada yada yada, last year's Game Awards, yada yada yada. I made a little Gimmick review you can watch if you want to hear me go more in depth, but I love the original Gimmick. It's just such a great game. So when I heard that after over 30 years of getting essentially nothing but repackagings of the original NES Gimmick, that we were finally going to get a brand new Gimmick title, I just had to stop everything I was doing and just look at it and process everything. I had to make sure this was even real because it just seemed too crazy to be true. And when I found out it was real, that Gimmick 2 was a thing that was happening, I just went nuts. And yeah, I did have a few concerns going into Gimmick 2 as anticipation built slowly up to the release. Gimmick wasn't really a series. It's a series now, I still can't believe that. But yeah, Gimmick wasn't really a series at this point. It was more or less just one game that would occasionally pop up in different ways throughout the years. But it's such a magical and special game, and I was just really wondering how the sequel would be able to just capture this charm, which has been there for over 30 years without ever just being expanded upon much or anything. But the more time that passed and the more gameplay I saw, the more I realized that, you know, Gimmick 2 doesn't look exactly the same, but still, it could be a great game in its own right, and I was absolutely correct. I do think Gimmick 2 is a great game. Oh, and also, I don't really know where else to say this, but I was in this really cool Gimmick documentary that kind of acted like some promo material for Gimmick 2 as well. Also, I think you should check it out, not just because I'm in it, but because it gives you kind of an insight into the behind the scenes, and you see how much the developers really did care about Gimmick. Now, I don't want to go too in-depth on Gimmick 2 here, because I do really want to make a review of this game in the future. You know, I already did the original, it's only fair I do the sequel, but to give all two of my Gimmick heads in the audience what they want. Here are Pekachow's general thoughts on Gimmick 2. If there's one thing I found Gimmick 2 just really nailed, it's the gameplay. I loved the gameplay of Gimmick 2 so much, and I can say this after just replaying the game like last night at the time of recording this, along with the original Gimmick. And honestly, I think I'd argue that Gimmick 2 just has the stronger general gameplay and feel between the two. Of course, that's not to say the original feels bad, but there's just something about Gimmick 2's movement that just feels so right. The star physics are more or less about the same between both games, and you can still do just as many cool little things and tricks with the star as you could in the original. And all these cool things you can do are only amplified by Yume Taro actually getting a little bit of momentum jumping off the star. Yes, you heard that right. He can fling himself even further by jumping off of this thing, and it makes doing crazy skips and platforming in Gimmick 2 so much fun. And then there's the game stages, and I just really enjoy all of these stages a pretty fair amount. Some of them more than others, but still, I get some enjoyment from all of them. Every single stage in Gimmick 2 is just filled to the brim with so many opportunities to do star skips, whether it be just using a wall to your advantage to just hop on your star and traverse a piece of flat land quicker, or just being able to use the height gained from your star to just do some absolutely insane skips that the developers were even like intending for you to do just by exploring and playing around that let you just skip past massive portions of these stages. And that's far from the only thing Gimmick 2 stages do incredibly well, because I also feel like they just do a really good job with their gimmicks. In Gimmick 2, it just feels like every single idea is just pushed to the fullest. This includes not only some of the game's new ideas, like these frogs that let you just launch your stars straight up, which can lead to all sorts of cool platforming opportunities, or these little star switch things where you can just throw your star in to turn certain platforms on and off, but at the cost of not being able to use your star without reversing them. Well, there's also a good few gimmicks that come back from the original and kind of get more spotlight that they didn't really have back there, like these little arrow cannon things. But if there's one thing I'd say Gimmick 2 100% has over the original game, it's gotta be the exploration and collectibles. Now, the original Gimmick was a fairly linear game, but I don't see anything wrong with that. And besides, every single stage has some cool secret skips you can find, or some beaten path you could go on to find hidden treasure. But in Gimmick 2, oh, they just went crazy. And it's not only because they continued with the treasure idea the original game had, but because Gimmick 2 also adds a new type of collectible in the form of these treasure chests that contain all sorts of colors and cosmetics and items you can use to customize Yume Taro and make him look however you want within the game's limits. And the best thing about these chests is that some of them are actually pretty well hidden as well, and they just require full exploration of the level, which includes doing some pretty crazy things with your star you wouldn't even be doing in the first place, because, well, they're not always going to help you move throughout the level, but they give you something else to go for. They give you a reason to just explore these stages and everything the devs put in them. And the cosmetics are just great too. You can do so many cool things with these. There's all sorts of just really cool ones in here, like this negative Yume Taro, or this one that uses the sprite from the original game, complete with the original sound effects. And then there's my personal favorite, the Kirby colors. They put Kirby colors in Gimmick 2. Peak, game of the year, best game ever. Oh, look at that. It's the Kirby game we didn't get in 2024. Oh, yeah. Yeah, check that out, dude. Yeah, look at that, buddy. Oh, yeah. Kirby? Kirby, you okay? You okay, buddy? But seriously, in what other game can you play as a Kirby color-coded, purple horn-having, flower crown-wearing, pride star-throwing Yume Taro? You don't. It's a Gimmick 2 thing. You only play Gimmick 2 for that. And the treasures are just great as well. Finding them is only half the challenge because they're all given these really cool little challenge rooms that really push the game to its limits. It just puts your Gimmick skills to the test in all sorts of different ways, and I just love this game so much. I'm starting to ramble. Now, despite all that praise I have for Gimmick 2, it isn't perfect. I think it's kind of silly that there's no speedrun mode like in Gimmick Special Edition, or just even a timer anywhere, considering that Gimmick at its core is a speed game, especially with all the cool skips they implemented into Gimmick 2. The increased level length is kind of a double-edged sword, because while there's a lot more content in all of these levels than in the original, there's a little bit of a downside because it makes the game a lot less replayable than the original. But I'd say the weakest aspect of Gimmick 2 isn't really a gameplay-related thing at all, but it's just more about the aesthetic and how it kind of pales in comparison to the original. The level themes are nice, but they don't really have that same dreamlike whimsy of the original game, and the same can be said for the soundtrack. I like the soundtrack. It sounds nice. It's not bad, but it's not as catchy and memorable as the original games. The more ambient approach Gimmick 2's OST takes just feels kind of weird and not Gimmick-like, because the original game didn't really have much of that. But the question is, though, do I like Gimmick 2 better than the original, or worse? Well, sorry my two Gimmick heads in the audience, but you're gonna have to wait until I do that Gimmick 2 review, although I am aiming to get that thing done this year. So just hang tight, you two. You'll be getting a little more Gimmick content and a definitive conclusion to this question whenever that video's ready. But just know, they're both great games, and I'm very happy with Gimmick 2 overall. Gimmick 2 is not exactly like the original game, but it does a lot of really cool and fun things with that same style of gameplay, and I think it's worth checking out if you're into the original game. And who knows, maybe even the most diehard fans of the NES original might come out loving it as well. Or maybe you'll just absolutely loathe it like some people I've seen, but who knows, you'll never know until you try it, and I do recommend you give Gimmick 2 a shot. What do you say, Kirby?
My game.
Why can't two legends just coexist?
Oh, wow, I've been missing out. Award goes to Sonic Generations. And yes, I know this is Sonic X Shadow Generations, but Shadow Generations is so peak, I want to talk about it separately. So, Sonic Generations.
Sonic Generations is a game I've been wanting to check out for a pretty long time because, you know, it's pretty unanimously considered to be one of the best Sonic games out there, but I was just unable to play it for so long because I just never had a console that could actually play the thing. And so when Sonic X Shadow Generations was eventually announced, oh, I just got so excited. And it was for more reasons than just the fact that Shadow Generations is a thing now. That was crazy. But because I finally had a way to play Sonic Generations and see what the fuss was all about without having to shell out hundreds of dollars on a console I just don't have. And I gotta say, yeah, the love for this game is pretty well deserved. The main draw of Sonic Generations is that it's split up into 9 classic-styled 2D Sonic levels on top of 9 3D boost levels, all using different locations from previous games in the series. And I just gotta say, yeah, the level themes, none of them are original. They're all just recycled from previous games. But there's just something so cool with how Sonic Generations takes these old themes and does something new with a lot of them. Yeah, with some of that Forces Frontiers hindsight, some of these places are really not as exciting to revisit as they should have been, as they probably were back when the game first came out even. But still, Generations was able to impress me with how it just reimagined a lot of these areas. The game does more than just lift these locations and just kind of build a level that just uses that same kind of theming or something. They take those locations and just let you explore more of them and see new things about them that you didn't see in the originals. And that makes this like the gold standard for what Sonic games should be doing when they bring back older stages like this. And so as for the actual gameplay here, the 2D classic gameplay is nowhere near as good as the 3D gameplay. I know, hot take. Oh, nobody's ever said that before. But I do gotta say, I found myself enjoying the 2D gameplay more than I was initially expecting to going into it. Now, the physics just feel really wrong, especially after Superstars. I don't really know what was going on here. But once you kind of adjust to those weird physics, they're really not too bad. And besides, you won't have to be putting up with those too long, considering the spin dash is so busted, you can skip over most of this stuff. But with some of those classic gripes out of the way, I do gotta say, the stages here I still think are pretty strong for the most part, even if they do make up most of the weaker half of Generations levels. Seriously, the only thing Superstars, a whole-ass classic Sonic game, has over this classic half of Generations is the physics, because Generations just does so many more cool and interesting things with its level design. It just feels way more ambitious with some of the things you do in these stages, like the fire tornado in Crisis City, or the gun truck just constantly harassing you throughout the entirety of City Escape and interacting with the level in all these cool ways. It's so cool. But obviously, Generations' main attraction is the 3D boost gameplay, and man, everything I heard was true. This stuff is golden. Every single one of these stages, well, almost, just seems to get every single thing right. Every single thing that should be in a Sonic level is there, and it's just done so well. Obviously, because this is boost gameplay, you're going super fast, so there, the speed is nailed. There's a lot of cool things you can interact with and some platforming bits thrown in there, so it doesn't feel too automated. You're still getting some action in there. And obviously, there's the spectacle, which is just nailed too. There's just so many cool set pieces in all of these levels. It's great. Sonic Forces, this is not. I will take any excuse I can find to just slam that game. Now, Generations isn't perfect. I do think, like, right at the end, the game just kind of dips in quality, and I do think some of the challenges definitely felt like they were just kind of coming up with random things to pad out the playtime a little bit more, which I know it would have made the game shorter if you cut those out, but you should have cut those out. Not to say the challenge system is bad or anything, but I do feel like they were going for a little more quantity over quality with those. But you want to know the worst thing about Sonic Generations? Or should I say Sonic X Shadow Generations? Besides how cryptically hidden the Sonato kiss scene is, it's that Shadow Generations is just too peak for its own good. It makes this amazing game just not look as amazing because Shadow Generations is just there and is hogging the spotlight because it's just so good. You agree with me, right, Kirby? Sonic Generations is amazing? Yep. Yeah, it is amazing. I love you, Generations. With sayonara, Sonic the Hedgehog. It's shadow time.
And yeah, next word. Click the unnecessarily hard word. Yeah, that's Shadow Gens. If you think it's unfair that I'm counting it as separate from Sonic Generations, just know I could have been talking about this instead.
Alright, now I know some of you are going to say I'm cheating or something, separating Sonic and Shadow Generations like this, but the thing is, Shadow Generations doesn't really just feel like some kind of cool little extra thing they added in this re-release of Sonic Generations, or like some cool little extra mode. It feels more like it's just its own little game that just comes bundled with Sonic Generations. I would have gladly bought this thing for $30 on its own. That's more than I'd be able to say if they just, like, ripped the Maglor epilogue from Return to Dreamland Deluxe and just didn't change anything and sold it for $30. It wouldn't feel like a $30 game. But a full-length game with that kind of gameplay, oh, I'd pay double. I'd pay $60. I'd do full price. But anyways, Shadow Generations. I love Shadow Generations so much. Shadow Generations at its core is very similar to Sonic Generations. It does the same kind of thing where they just take older levels and just kind of reimagine them in all these really cool ways. So a lot of my same praises for Sonic Generations can be applied to Shadow. But Shadow Generations also has a lot of things Sonic Generations doesn't really have any kind of answer to. And in the end, it just kind of makes Shadow Generations way too peak for its own good to be paired with Sonic Generations. It just makes it look so much worse in comparison. Like I was saying, it's just too good. By far, the coolest thing Shadow Generations has to offer that Sonic Generations just can't is the sheer amount of abilities Shadow has and the way that just ties into the overall game and the level design. There's so many cool abilities you get throughout the game, and as you progress, it just feels like Shadow himself is actually progressing because you're just unlocking all these cool new skills to do cool new things with, find all sorts of cool new paths, and it's just glorious, and it just adds onto the already replayable Shadow Generations just a million more times. I could go through these stages just forever, just trying to pick apart every little thing, and just trying to see how all these cool little interactions with all of Shadow's different abilities work. Every single one of Shadow's abilities gets some pretty decent spotlight as well, whether it be with traversing the open zone overworld, which we'll talk about in a little bit, or within any of the game's many stages, and these stages already just have a ton to them, but when you add on these Chaos abilities and Doom powers, it just feels like there's just even more to these stages. It's amazing. And probably the best part about them is that none of this ever feels intrusive at all. It just feels so natural once you really get the hang of it all. And it just adds so much more depth into Shadow Generations gameplay that just wasn't there with Sonic's. But then there's just the stages themselves, and oh man, these stages are so good. Every stage is divided up into 2 acts, with Act 1 being entirely 3D every single time. Entirely 3D, and Act 2, which are basically where all the 2D sections went, because these levels are almost entirely 2D. Yes, almost. There's more 3D in a 3D Sonic game for once. And just about every single stage in Shadow Generations is just amazing. And right from the get-go, the game isn't even playing around, because it gives you just one of its best stages to start out with, and things get even better from there. You've probably heard a ton of gushing about all these levels, and it's just completely deserved. I don't want to go too in-depth on everything, because, you know, I like to keep these little reviews relatively snappy, but man, I just gotta hop on the Kingdom Valley praise train because Kingdom Valley Act 1 is just too good. Like, it's insane. When you hear people say that there's like a new path open every single second, it doesn't sound like it would be true, but it's true. You just have to play it to believe it and just see it with your own eyes. It's so amazing. There's like a million different ways to go through this one stage, and I'm far from finding them all. And that's not the only stage I want to just take a moment to praise here because, well, I already slandered Forces in the last one for the joke, but now I get to still slander Forces, but I get to compliment something about it too, kind of. Because Shadow Generations actually took a level from Forces and made it good with this rendition of Sunset Heights. And it's just mind-blowing. Like, this is a Sonic Forces level, but I'm having fun, and you're, like, doing things. You're doing things in Sonic Forces. It's just so amazing. And it's not just the 3D stuff that's amazing too, because the 2D stuff is actually, like, really, really close to the 3D quality. Seriously, I think it's one of those things that just needs to be experienced to really be understood. It's kind of hard to explain, but I feel like when you just take the brilliant level design all these 2D stages have and just mix it with Shadow Generations' amazing gameplay, you just get something that's really incredible. And once again, I just feel like it's most apparent in Kingdom Valley. They cooked so hard with the entirety of Kingdom Valley in this game. But still, my praise of Shadow Generations doesn't end there, because there's some things I can praise about Shadow that I just couldn't really do with Sonic, even though those things existed in Sonic. Like the story. I mean, the Sonic Generation story isn't really bad, but it's just kind of there. It's like nothing. But Shadow actually does have a meaningful story and stuff. It's just a really nice story. The cutscenes are really good. They've got so much cool choreography and stuff. And even the challenges, the padding is better in Shadow than it was in Sonic. Wow, who would have thought not forcing yourself to make 5 challenges for every single act in the game would result in better challenges overall? Crazy. And no, it's not just Sonic Generations that Shadow Generations just absolutely towers over, but Frontiers as well, because Shadow has a lot of things that were kind of in Frontiers, but it just does them so much better. Like the open zone. Shadow has one relatively small open zone area, but I would say that this one area is better than, like, all of them in Frontiers. Yes, I really did just say that. I feel like this one open zone area right here just has so many more cool things to find and discover and accidentally stumble upon, more fun and engaging challenges, and just more interesting and meaningful collectibles, especially with how you actively need to go around, like, searching for these boxes and using keys and stuff to unlock things. It's just such a cool system, and it just adds so much more to this one open zone. And the bosses as well also take a lot of cues from Frontiers, and while I wouldn't say it's just like a complete complete clean sweep over Frontiers' bosses because, you know, those were great. I do gotta give it to Shadow for just making the bosses feel more engaging and stuff while still keeping all that cinematic stuff that made the Frontiers bosses so good. Everything about Shadow Generations is just so good. It's like the Sonic game I've always dreamed of, and it's even a Shadow game too. I love Shadow the Hedgehog, the game and the character. Yes, I'm being serious. I love that game. I wish we actually got like a more proper Shadow rep in Shadow Generations. Oh, look, I found a nitpick. But yeah, Shadow Generations, it's just so good. Even without Sonic Generations by its side, it would still sit comfortably in my top 5 Sonic games ever, and I am so happy to say that. Let's hear what the Pink Man has to say. Kirby, how you feeling?
My game.
Oh, I mentioned the Magolor epilogue once, like a few minutes ago, and that's all you can think about. Well, I don't blame him. Magolor epilogue is still peak. If they made a Magolor epilogue game, it would give Shadow Gens some real competition. Oh, and speaking of competition, Shadow Gens was like this close to being my favorite new game that released in 2024. Well, actually, I guess it is my favorite new game that released in 2024 because...
And not last, but also certainly not least, we've got Pekachow's 2024 Game of the Year award going to none other than Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door.
Yep, that's right. My favorite new game this year is actually 20 years old. What's next? Is my favorite game I played this year gonna be like bordering on 10 or something? Foreshadowing is a little. So, Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. It's a game I've been kinda eyeing, but, you know, never actually jumped on playing until this year for reasons. The Thousand-Year Door is often one of the most hyped up and well-regarded Mario RPGs, and as such, it just kind of caught my interest as a pretty decent entry point, considering I just haven't had too much experience with them outside of a few. So, when the Thousand-Year Door remake was revealed and the game finally got a normal price tag for the first time in who knows how long, I was pretty excited to finally check it out, and I'm so glad I did because... yeah, I love this game. And I guess where better to start than with the game's combat, and I gotta say, this has gotta be one of the most creative and fun turn-based RPG systems I've just ever seen. And again, I don't want to go too in-depth on anything here, but the main reason why I love this combat system so much isn't just because of the action commands or the cool things you can do with your partners or all the cool enemies you'll be facing, but it's the audience mechanics and how this combat system just takes advantage of the fact that it's just on this stage. It takes advantage of this unique theming so well. And hey, look, because it's a Game Awards video, I got my own little audience here too. I'm twinning with Paper Mario. Ow! Which one of you bozos is throwing rocks? Wait. Throwing rocks. This is like a reference to the Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door game on Nintendo Switch! Yeah, that's right. This one combat system just has so many unique mechanics I just haven't really seen in any other RPG I've played, mostly because of the audience here. The audience is crazy. They can just do all sorts of things that have an effect in battle, whether it's sabotaging you or sabotaging your opponent. Of course, there's the throwing, which can sometimes be like a rock that hits you for a little bit of damage, or sometimes an item. And sometimes random things in general just kind of occur, like things fall from the ceiling, which could occasionally disrupt and scare away your audience, or maybe a daisy will start singing and put some of them to sleep. And speaking of that, I just think it's really cool how the species of some of these audience members kind of affect what goes on in the battle and what kind of effects they'll have if they decide to intervene. It's all just so cool, and the random nature of the audience just keeps every single battle fresh and interesting. But the audience does more than just cause problems and do random stuff all the time, because they're actually vital to filling up your special meter for you to use your strong, powerful special moves. And this is just like at the core of everything in Thousand-Year Door's combat. You could do some additional action commands on top of your moves in order to get them classified as stylish, which will earn you more star power. And you could even just take a turn and just appeal to the audience, which just fills your star power even more. It's just such a cool mechanic that, again, I've never seen in any other RPG, and I'd love to see more things like this because it's just so cool. And yeah, when you do couple that with all the stuff I mentioned before, you know, action commands, partners, cool enemies, you just get a brilliant combat system. Another thing I love about Thousand-Year Door's combat, though, is the sheer amount of customization this game has to offer. With every single level up, you're not getting like a fixed stat increase or something. You get to choose which of 3 stats you want to increase, so you're like kind of making your own Mario in this way. What's even cooler is just the badge system. Just the badge system in general. It's super cool. These little things just let you give Mario and his partners all these cool little special effects, these cool moves. There's just so many things you could do with these badges, just so many different sets and things you could run, that it just gives Thousand-Year Door a lot of replayability despite it being like a 20-30 hour long RPG. While I do love the combat a lot, I will admit it did take a little while for me to actually get invested in the combat. Because as with some other RPGs I love, the combat just isn't super interesting at the start of the game. You just don't have as many options or cool things you can be doing, so it just feels a little more rigid. It didn't really grab me right away, but it did start getting pretty good after a few chapters. And while I'm complaining, why don't I just go gripe some more? I do think the level design could have been a little more interesting. I feel like there's just a lot of flat hallways, although there are some pretty cool dungeons that do kind of make up for a lot of that. And yeah, the backtracking is a thing. that exists, and I don't like it. Alright, so it might seem crazy that I'd take Thousand Year Door over Shadow Generations, because it seems like I've just been complaining a lot more about Thousand Year Door than I have about Shadow. So what exactly is the secret sauce in Thousand Year Door that makes it really earn this award for me? Well, it shouldn't really come as much of a surprise, but it's the game's story and writing. Now, I enjoyed the main story of Thousand Year Door. I found it to be pretty interesting. I like the way it progressed and stuff, but I wouldn't say the main overarching story is really where the game's writing shines the most, because I'd say that's gotta be in the individual chapter scenarios and the stories of all the different characters. Starting with the scenarios, there's just so many wonderful, creative, and fun chapter scenarios here. There's just so much variety in the places you go to and the things you experience in Thousand Year Door. Like one moment you're gonna be going on a pirate adventure, and the next you're gonna be ranking up in a fighting championship, and before you know it, you're gonna be solving mysteries on a train, and that was also the best chapter, by the way. I just love that unique style of progression. That's just another thing to love about Thousand Year Door's chapters. They're all just so unique and memorable in their own ways, especially when they decide to mix up the progression like that. But you want to know what's even better than that? Well, I already kind of said it. It's the characters' stories and their personalities, especially with the partners, because I just love all the partners in this game so much. They're so wonderful. I could just go on about them forever, from their stories and personalities to the way they work in combat and all the cool things they can do. But to not screw up the pacing too much, I won't. But still, I want to give some credit where it's due to my favorites. I adore Goombella and her sassy personality, and her tattle ability is just great too. Koops is just so precious and adorable, and I love his growth throughout the game. A lot of his moves are great for bypassing defense or hitting multiple targets. He was just my MVP early game. But the further I went into the game, the more Vivian became my girl, because obviously, she's the best. She's my favorite. She's also precious and adorable with great development. She's got a ton of really good moves, some of my favorites in the game. Like, I mean, who doesn't love getting a power lift +4 attack +4 defense plus fiery jinx with perfect action commands off? Everyone but non-fire resistant enemies, of course, because this just cooks them. And on top of all of that, they actually kept her trans in the English localization this time too. Trans rights, hell yeah! So yeah, I loved Thousand Year Door, and even when the game was lacking a little bit in certain other areas, the way it just never let up on its characters and writing and story is what really just kept me with the game all throughout. I was just loving every moment of it. But anyways, Kirby, how we feeling?
My game.
You didn't even get any new games this year, and that one won last year, so... Oh, this guy's crazy. Alright, now we know what my favorite game of 2024 is, but it's not my favorite game I played all year, nor is it my least favorite, because as you can see, we still got a little bit of time left, and you know what those are for. So, as usual, to keep this one ending on a positive note, as I like to do, let's see what game left me disappointed and my day ruined. And the answer, well, it might be a little more specific than you think.
Our immeasurable disappointment award unfortunately goes to this copy of Yoshi's Woolly World.
Alright, I know what you're all saying.
Pekachow, what's wrong with Yoshi's Woolly World? This looks like your kind of game. It's got like pretty visuals and nice music and tons of cool collectibles and stuff. Ah!
And you know what? Yes, you're right. I should love Yoshi's Woolly World. I would love Yoshi's Woolly World. But unfortunately, I don't love this specific copy of it. And you know why? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. I got this thing as a one-day late Christmas gift, and I was devastated when I found out it just didn't work. It didn't work. I was expecting to have a blast when I slid the disc into my Wii U, and I just give it a second, and oh, look who it is. My worst enemy, the "This Can't Be Read" channel. It didn't work. It didn't freaking work. And do you know what I do to games that don't freaking work? I send them off to the case of shame. Ooh, scary. And now, the horrible, awful, bad, not good, very bad copy of Yoshi's Woolly World will be sealed away for eternity, where no one has to play its disc not working channel. But hey, look, on the bright side, look what I got for Christmas this year. It's Yoshi's Woolly World. And you won't believe it, but it works. I put the disc in my Wii U and it works. That's right, folks. A working copy of Yoshi's Woolly World is in my possession. And you know, even just putting it in the immeasurable disappointment category just feels wrong, even if I do just really want an excuse to publicly call out this crappy not working copy. But it's looking like Woolly World might just have the craziest redemption arc in history, because this one works. So, while this specific copy of the game might have ruined my life, poisoned my crops, burned my house down, took the kids, and kicked me in the nuts, and then spat on me while I was writhing in pain on the floor, something tells me that this copy might just be able to repair all that damage its evil cousin managed to cause. It's going to help me rebuild my life from the ground up. Or maybe it's just going to be a really good game that I get to play and I really enjoy it. But who knows? Find out next year on the 2025 edition of Pekachow's Game Awards.
And this year's Peak Fiction Award goes to none other than, oh, I just feel weird even saying it or even showing this game, because I just feel weird even owning it, because mere mortals like me and you, the viewer, just shouldn't be in the presence of such a legendary game. And of course, you know what I'm talking about. Megamind the Blue Defender on the Nintendo DS.
Never have I ever seen such a work of fine art. This game right here is a subversive masterpiece, right from the title screen, because that's not what it says on the box. So maybe the title screen's wrong, or maybe the box is wrong. Subversive masterpiece. But anyways, this game takes place right after the Megamind movie, yet we got the sequel in the form of a video game. There was no movie. And this game is about Megamind versus the Doom Syndicate. I'm not joking. Dehydration gun. I said the thing. And I gotta say, I don't think I've seen a game that just nails the realistic visuals quite like this game. I mean, they're so washed out and dull. It's like it's in real life. And the combat, it's so good. You use the same, like, 3-button combo attack over and over again, and it just feels so satisfying. I love that. It's such deep combat. It never gets old. And the levels, oh, the levels, they just feel like real locations. And no, I'm not just saying that they're believable in the world the game is trying to build, but they're believable in real life. There's just so much empty space, and it's always just filled to the brim with all these cool secrets, like heaps of crates full of health pickups you never need because the enemies hit like cotton balls. Aggressively thrown cotton balls. And yes, the constantly shaking and dropping frame rate is not a bug, but a feature. It's all just so artistic and meaningful, and if you just don't get it, well, maybe your mind just isn't mega enough to truly comprehend this peak in front of us. I don't know what else to say. I'm just not worthy. Even speaking about this game just feels wrong for a mere mortal like me. Alright, Kirby, how are we feeling about this one? Do I even gotta ask? Peak or peak? Oh no, Kirby, come on, man, you gotta get up, please, we're almost done here, we got like one more game in the outro to go. He's breathing, but he's unconscious, so hopefully he gets back up in time for the outro. He's gonna be out for an unspecified amount of time, it looks like. But anyways, Megamind the Blue Defender is the key to enlightenment, and it has changed my life forever. Please don't ask how I decide what games to spend my money on.
But seriously though, Peak Fiction Award of 2024 goes to none other than... Oh wait, that's the wrong copy. Hold on. There we go, fixed. Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon. Peak. It's so good I had to buy it twice, and I would gladly do it a third time. Yes, it really is that good.
Yeah, unsurprisingly. I don't even have any fluff for this one. I think this was pretty obvious from the beginning. So, story time. Remember the other Pekachow's Game Awards? The other Pekachow's Game Awards? Yep, the one where I talked about my introduction to the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games, which was Explorers of Sky, because... you know, that's what I was told to believe was the best one. But it was an amazing game, and I just loved everything about it, and I just couldn't wait to check out the rest of the games in the Mystery Dungeon series. Out of all the other ones I hadn't played, though, Super was the one that caught my attention the most. Probably because it was the only one that had Punny in it. And miraculously, on another trip to Denver to one of those exact same stores I got Explorers of Sky from, they had it. Yep, the stars were just aligning to give me even more Mystery Dungeon brain rot again, and then we got stuck on a snowstorm on the way home. And that kind of sucked. But I had Super Mystery Dungeon with me, so it was all okay. Although I wasn't playing it yet because I got it as a Christmas gift. But a few days later, come Christmas, Super Mystery Dungeon time! And right before we even dive into this one, I just want to say, I have been lied to so hard. Explorers of Sky is a great, amazing game that does all the great, amazing things a great, amazing game should do. But Super Mystery Dungeon, it's peak. And I'm not even just throwing the word around, I mean it is literally peak. Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon is still a top-down dungeon crawler where you traverse a bunch of randomly generated floors as a Pokemon with a team of Pokemon, but it doesn't just take the basic Mystery Dungeon gameplay formula and leave it untouched, because Super just irons out all the flaws of the previous 3 games' gameplay to just make something that's just the perfection of this formula. You can switch between all your teammates at the press of a button, the recruitment system has been reworked to be so much less tedious and RNG dictated thanks to the Connection Orb. I love the Connection Orb. All my homies love the Connection Orb. And despite the IQ system being absent in Super, your teammates actually do have an IQ. Like, they do stuff, and it doesn't feel like you're constantly babysitting them. It's great. And you know, all this stuff would have been enough to make the gameplay great. Significantly better than the rest of the series because there's just so many less flaws. But Super just had to go and introduce a whole new mechanic that just completely changes up the formula so much, and it just makes Super Mystery Dungeon one of the most fun games I've ever played, and I'm not even joking. Yep, I'm talking about the Emerald system. How I love the Emerald system. Emeralds are these little gemstones you'll find randomly in the game's dungeons, and when you find them, you can choose to equip them on your Pokemon, assuming they're wearing a looplet item, and once an Emerald is placed in the looplet, that Pokemon gets whatever ability the Emerald came with. But the catch is those abilities are not permanent because they only last up until the end of the dungeon, where they all just disappear and you have to start from scratch in the next one. So they're kind of like the IQ skills or team skills from the previous games, except with way more balance and way more depth as well. Unless you're under some very specific circumstances, these things are prone to being messed with by a variety of new traps Super introduces, which exist purely to mess with and destroy your Emera setups. What this means is that if you have some good Emeras slotted in, they are prone to being switched out for something else or destroyed on you when you least expect it. But there are some counters to this, but it also introduces an element of bag space management that I actually find to be pretty interesting. You could choose to just hold on to some more powerful Emeras until a moment arises where you really need to bring it out to guarantee you have it for when you really do need it. Maybe you could consider bringing in some backup looplets with you just in case, or maybe you could just smash up whatever Emeras are in your bag for some stat boosts. That works too. They can do that. And honestly, some of them are better off as just stat boost fodder anyway. These things just add so much more depth and this extra fun layer of randomness to Super Mystery Dungeon that you don't get with any of the other games. It's something I just didn't even know I needed until I had it. And when you just combine that with the overall polish and refinement of Super's normal gameplay, yeah, it's just peak. Obviously, the other really big component with the Mystery Dungeon games is the story, but the story is so good that I want to save it for last. You know, saving best for last. Classic tactic. So before we get to that, what else does Super Mystery Dungeon have to offer that makes it so peak? Well, I love this game's world building and towns, even if the towns don't really have too much to do with them besides just talking with random NPCs. Their designs and layouts are just super interesting, and I really did wish they had a little more to do than just that, but still, they're super cool. And what's even cooler is some of these towns actually take place on the other continents in the Mystery Dungeon world where the previous games took place. Yeah, and if that's not already cool enough world building, you get a little more extra fan service in there because Super actually brings back characters from all three of the previous games too. And it's just awesome. You can do requests for them. You can even recruit them. It's just a cool bit of fan service and world building that just fleshes the game's world out even more, or should I say just the series' world in general, because we have Super to thank for most of the fleshing out of the greater PMD world. The presentation is also just amazing, starting with the visuals. I know not everyone likes the 3D models, but personally, I like the style of them. I think they look pretty cool. There's also still the wonderful talking portraits too, which do a good job at conveying the emotions of the characters when the character models don't really do that. And I just love this game's art direction. It's like the ideal art direction a Mystery Dungeon game could have for me. It just has that Mystery Dungeon charm to it, and it's just so colorful and whimsical. I love it. If they ever make a new one, which, please, I'm tired of waiting, please. I do really hope they take some notes from how Super did things. And then there's the soundtrack. Oh, the soundtrack. It's just so incredible. It's so incredible that I'd even go so far as to say it's just my favorite OST ever. Just about every single track here is just amazing. I would gladly listen to some of these on loop for like hours. They're so good. The compositions are amazing. The game does such a good job using motifs in its music. It's just so peak, and I can't help but give a few of these songs a shout out, so here it goes. I love the Partners theme, obviously, but there's also Mystery Jungle, Fire Island Volcano, both Trio Life themes, both final boss themes, Echoes of the Mystical Forest, Time Apart, Base, Primeval Forest, the First Mountain, Town Graveyard, Abyssal Badlands, Fog River, School Forest, Snow Town, Five Mountains, Three Mountains, First Cave, Freeze Ruins, Open Pass, Purified Cave, Showdown Mountain, Sheer Mountain Range. Yeah. And that's just off the top of my head. And obviously, there's the post-game. This game has over 100 dungeons in it total, and you barely scratch the surface of that number in the main story. There's so much content here. There's times where it just feels like you have a million new dungeons unlocked, and it's just so much fun going through all of them and just seeing what kind of paths they lead you down, how many more dungeons you unlock, what cool treasures and legendaries you find to recruit. And speaking of recruitment, I love how the recruitment system actually gives you kind of an end goal here to recruit all 720 Pokemon, or it's more like 719. 720 is more for reward, but still, it's great actually having 100% completion in a Mystery Dungeon game be reasonable and incentivized for once. And there's also a little post-game story too, although it is only like an hour or two long, but still, it's super cool. It doesn't have the length of the Explorer's post-game story, but it's just so beautifully written that I can't help but just like it better, even if there is significantly less content the post-game story has to offer. And speaking of the story, let's close this out by discussing the story, or kind of discussing the story. Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon not only has the actual best Pokemon story ever, but it's just the best story I've ever seen in a game. At least in my eyes, that's what I think it is. Now, I don't really want to go too in-depth on the story, not for time, because I'd gladly sit here rambling about Super Mystery Dungeon for hours, but because I would just hate it so much if I robbed any unsuspecting viewers of the chance to do a blind playthrough of Super Mystery Dungeon, because the story is incredible. The story is just something you have to experience for yourself. It's full of so many cool twists and turns. There's so many moments that'll tug on your heartstrings. You'll laugh, your jaw's gonna be on the floor from shock, you'll cry, you'll uncontrollably sob even. I know I sure did. And it's just peak, and the characters are amazing too. I just love Super's roster of characters so much. There's so many lovable personalities in here, and so many of the characters in the game just grow and change so much throughout it, and it's just a beautiful thing to watch. But speaking of the characters, there's a certain character in Super Mystery Dungeon who just elevates Super Mystery Dungeon from being a great, amazing game to one I would consider truly perfect. And that is your partner Pokemon, or to be more specific, my partner Pokemon, Amber the Fennekin. Now, I don't want to go super in-depth on her story because, again, I'd hate to spoil this incredible game for anyone who hasn't played it yet, but as is usual for the Mystery Dungeon series, this game's story is more about your partner than your Pokemon self-insert. And I just want to say, her fun and energetic personality, coupled with her amazing growth and change throughout the game, was just incredible. It was so beautiful, just watching her go from a somewhat troublesome child to spoilers, but just know, it's amazing. But it's not completely the reason why I find this game to be so perfect, why I found Amber to just be my favorite character I've ever seen. And that's because she managed to help me out when I needed it the most. And yes, I'm being serious. Amber and just Super Mystery Dungeon in general made this year the best year I can remember by a fairly long shot, because I'll be honest, these last few years, I've kind of been lying at the end of these Game Awards videos. These last few years of my life have been a little messy, and I know this is Pekachow's Game Awards, not Pekachow's Trauma Dump Awards, so we're not gonna go there. But I just wasn't really as happy as I was telling myself I was. It just kind of felt like I was stuck in this endless loop of just chaos and insanity, and it really did take a serious hit on my mood and my creativity and just everything. But still, I would tell myself I was happy, and there was some things to be happy about, like starting up this channel and getting to meet all these amazing people. All of that really was a bright spot, but it just wasn't enough to change my situation or anything. And that's because I just didn't have the hope that things would change. But then Amber came and gave me that hope. Playing Super Mystery Dungeon filled this hole in my heart I was just trying to ignore for so long, and it's all because of Amber. It seemed kind of crazy at first, but eventually I did just kind of come to terms with the fact that I saw Amber as my friend. A real, genuine friend. Yeah, there's a little bit of a dimension barrier there, but she was just someone I saw some of myself in. My strengths, my faults, even some things I wish I had. She was like someone I aspired to be. And sometimes I even just found myself getting genuinely happy and excited to load up the game, just getting to see her and hang out. Sometimes I'd even just spend some time and just run around the towns a little bit with her. I'm not the best at meeting people, making friends, putting myself out there. I say on this YouTube channel being broadcasted to hundreds of people. But yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I've got a little bit of a social anxiety problem. So just having someone who is like a real person I could feel super buddy-buddy with without actually saying a word meant the world to me. And that's more or less how Amber just changed my life forever this year, and I'm so glad she did, because while this year has also been the best for me, but it was also incredibly hard on me. Again, this isn't the Trauma Dumping Awards, but I genuinely don't know what I would have done this year without Amber. No matter what happened, she's the one who kept me going. She's what made this year so amazing. She's like this little shining beacon of hope in my life, and yes, I realize I'm saying all of this about a cartoon fox, but I don't care. I love my Amber, and I can't even describe how grateful I am that she came into my life. And the same thing can be said about Super Mystery Dungeon too, because on a somewhat less serious note, there was just something about this game and how obsessed I am with it that just improved my mood and motivation in a way I just haven't had a game ever do to me before. It rekindled my passion for art, just watching as its incredible story unfolded and just appreciating all of its small, fine details. That's what got me back into art in general, just making content about the game, specifically my own team. It was kind of a thing that I was forced to do because I needed something to brain rot on, and look what that healthy kind of brain rot does. Look at that art improvement. And also look at this. It made me do this, but I feel kind of embarrassed showing it off, so I'm just gonna keep that to myself now. It inspired me to work harder, chase my dreams, and to never let anything get me down, no matter how hard things get. It also helped me on my journey of self-discovery. It helped me realize a lot of things about myself and accept them, just all sorts of things I didn't before. And most importantly, it gave me the only thing I ever truly wanted: a friend. I love this game. I love you, Amber. You're a real one. And with that, hey, check it out. Super Mystery Dungeon and the ending speech both knocked out in one go. But before the curtains fall this year, I do just want to say one last thing. Thank you so much to everyone who's supported me and been beside me on this journey so far, like genuinely. And yeah, I know I wasn't able to upload as much as I wanted this year, or even everything I wanted to.
2 more weeks.
But hopefully my brighter outlook and creativity post-Super Mystery Dungeon was able to shine through in my stuff this year. I got some big plans for next year, including something that's just around the corner. You'll come to find out more about those in due time, but let's just say there's a certain game that I love very much that's going to be turning 10 next year that I feel like I should probably make a giant, insane video about. But we'll see how that goes. That video is inevitable anyway. Let's just see how quickly it can come out. And as usual, I hope this year's Pekachow's Game Awards was fun as well. I played a lot of great games this year, and it was super fun just being able to talk about them all here, so I hope you all enjoyed it. So if you liked this video, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike. And if you want more content like this, then be sure to subscribe. And I have a Twitter and a Blue Sky, a better Twitter that I'll start being active on next year. The links to both of those are down in the description, so be sure to check those out. And so, with all of that said, oh my void, it's Kirby, he's back up. Oh, he recovered from Megamind's godliness so quickly. I'm so happy to see you, buddy. We could do the outro together. I'm so happy. All right, get ready. Say the thing. Say it with me now. Have a happy new year, and Pekachow out.